Workplace psychological safety is the most pressing need we have today. But do you have the tools to transform a toxic workplace into a psychologically safe one? We have a course for that. It is called From Tormentor to Mentor, Building a Psychologically Safe Workplace. With this self-study 3-hour online course, you can equip yourself and your organization to understand workplace bullying and harassment. More importantly, our course shows you how to build a foundation for a safe and healthy workplace using the SWELL principle: safety, well-being, encouragement, and learning. Elimination of bullying will only work if a foundation of psychological workplace safety has been intentionally built and maintained. Go to shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor to learn more. That's shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor.
Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. I'm very excited to bring to you today Karin M. Reed, who is the CEO and Chief Confidence Creator of Speaker Dynamics, a corporate communications training firm featured in Forbes. While speaking through a webcam might be new to much of the world, Karin has been teaching business professionals how to be effective on-camera communicators for nearly a decade, translating her experience as an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist and on-camera spokesperson into a methodology based upon the MVPs of on-camera success, a trademarked brand. Karin and her team have been chosen training partners for some of the world's most recognized companies and respected academic institutions of the world, ranging from Nike to Lenovo, from Duke University to the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. She's the author of 2 books on Camera Coach, Tools and Techniques for Business Professionals in a Video-Driven World, and one that's coming out very soon, and I want an autographed copy, just so you know, Karin. Suddenly Virtual, Making Remote Meetings Work. I can hardly wait to read that because it's exactly a woman after my own heart. We can do this virtually. We can meet around the world. Let's make it happen. And with COVID, it did happen. So here we are, right?
Absolutely. It's been fascinating being somebody who's taught these skills for, about 10 years, see everybody have to kind of embrace video communication immediately after COVID really took hold. And it's been very gratifying to be able to be in a position to help people to navigate it better.
Yes, well, when I saw your bio and your work, I was very excited to bring you onto the podcast because I have so many questions for you.
Okay, great. Bring it on, Marie.
So welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest.
Oh, it's an honor to have a conversation with you about this, and I do feel like we are kindred spirits.
I do too. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Give us some insights into the Karin that is not in the formal bio.
Oh, okay. All right. So probably it's best for me to explain a little bit, though, about how I came to this place, because it did really begin with me having a pretty successful broadcast journalism career. I interviewed everybody from Muhammad Ali to Bill Clinton. Then I left the business in 2004 to apply my skills in the corporate world. And what I found is that I would be hired as the professional spokesperson, but then more and more often, they would bring in people from the corner office or even the corner cubicle to appear on camera alongside of me and expect them to perform at the same level of skill as I did without any training whatsoever. And it's a very different skill set that is required to speak to a camera versus the one that you use when you're talking to people in the same room. So I recognized a business opportunity to teach business professionals how to be better on-camera communicators. And as mentioned, that was a decade ago. And the skills are more relevant today than ever. But it's been a lot of fun, a little bit head spinning to see it all occur. And for my business, it's been a bit like drinking from the fire hose, because it used to be a matter of trying to convince people that, on-camera communication skills are really important. And now people get it. And so it's been challenging, but a good challenge to be able to keep up with the demand. Hopefully the book will help.
I'm sure it will. It makes me think a little bit about being an actor on the stage and an actor for the film industry. You know, when you're an actor on the stage, you have to make big movements and use your voice so it projects. You have to interact with the live audience. When you're being filmed, you have to have a really expressive face and be able to respond in a variety of circumstances with cameras on all sides of you and redo the same take over and over and over again so they can get just the right look. you don't even feel like you're acting sometimes. You feel like you're in a photo shoot. It's a different experience. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Well, it is applicable in a lot of ways, because one of the things that I teach people immediately is the big distinction between, for example, doing a presentation in a live audience setting where you can actually see them, is that you are trying to project your voice. You are trying to reach the back of the room. But whenever you're talking on a camera, whether it's a camera in a studio or your webcam, you're actually just having a conversation with somebody who's only a couple of feet away. So it should feel less like you are standing up on stage and more like you are just chatting with somebody across the dinner table. And whenever you go into that conversation mode, it changes every aspect of the way you communicate. You change how you deliver verbally, you change how you deliver physically. And one of the mistakes I often see people make is they go into this kind of presenter mode where they try to, do all the things that be appropriate up on stage. And it looks really inappropriate or fake if they try to do it on a webcam. And helping people to kind of get past that is really an important piece of what I do, because it all boils down to authenticity, Marie. And just allowing yourself to be yourself. That's what's going to resonate with your audience.
I so agree with you. I'm also thinking of the other side of the spectrum, which would be people who just don't realize that other people are watching them on camera and they need to see them and hear them. And so, they have their camera on at odd angles, and you're seeing the top of their head, or they're looking at the wall in the opposite direction because that's how they see the monitor, but the laptop is showing them from somewhere else. Like, it's just so awkward because you feel like you can't connect, and they don't have that sense that they need to be seen in order to communicate.
Right. Well, I mean, you've got the problem with people not turning the camera on, and then when they turn it on, it's not helping them.
Right.
So, I call it elevating your personal production value, which is basically how you show up when you're on a webcam. And I think there's this misconception that, if I try to make sure that I really look good on camera, that's just vanity. That's not the case at all. The reason why you want to make sure that you are showing up as best you can is because you're being respectful of the person on the other side. It really doesn't change your experience at all if you're halfway out of frame and you use shadows, across your face. But it dramatically impacts the experience for the person you're conversing with. And when you're in this virtual video setting, you have fewer ways of conveying your message. Yes, video does allow you to provide some nonverbal cues, but you don't have as many data points to offer as you would if you were face to face. So you want to ensure that the data that they do receive, those nonverbals they can read, are very clearly expressed. So that means you want to ensure that your face is well lit, that people can easily read your facial expressions so that they can figure out the intent of your message. Or, if somebody has their camera on that you're conversing with and you say something, you can read their nonverbals and determine the impact of your message. If you don't have your webcam on, say that you say something and there's this big chunk of silence afterwards, that could be an indication that they agree with what you said, or it can be an indication that they disagree with what you said, or they're confused. You'd have no way of being able to tell without having video on. And it just makes it harder for everyone if you don't have all of your senses engaged. So not having your video on means that you are keeping the most powerful tool that you have in the toolbox, because allowing people to be able to read your body language is a critical way in how we communicate a message.
Yes, I certainly agree with you. What you just said about it's not vanity, it's about respect for the person who's watching and listening on the other end is really, really important, because it can be just as much vanity to disregard how you come across because you don't want to change what you're doing. It kind of reminds me of people who say, I don't need the mic because my voice is loud enough. Everyone tells me I'm too loud. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, can the people at the end of the room hear you without having to strain? And that would be respectful to let them hear you because they came for that. So it's the same thing. It's being conscious about yourself online so that you can help the other person have the best possible experience is really what it's all about.
Absolutely. And my co-author is Dr. Joseph Allen for the second book, Suddenly Virtual, and he is a meeting scientist, and he talks about media richness theory. And media richness theory is based upon the idea that the more complex the message, the richer the medium needs to be to convey it. So, for example, sometimes a text or email is fine, like say that you're scheduling an appointment. But if you need to have a more impactful conversation with somebody, maybe then you pick up the phone, you have a phone call. But if you are trying to deliver a message that is complex or, has a lot of nuance, then you better be thinking about making it a video meeting, because then that allows you to have the maximum power possible to convey it in our current situation. Face to face is still the best option, but for the most part, we're not allowed to do that right now. So going to the second best option, where you have video engaged on a call, is truly your best bet.
I really like this idea of media rich for the complexity of the message, and adopting the richness of medium that's going to be appropriate for how complex that message is. It's really great. We could talk about this for a long time. I haven't even gotten to my first question with you yet.
It's fun to have a conversation. I'll go wherever you lead it, Marie.
Yeah. So let's go to your childhood. I'd like to know if you'd be willing to share a couple of incidents from your childhood or adolescence that you think were really foundational for you, that helped you to be that person that you are.
It's funny because I think I didn't have like those dramatic experiences that would make a really great story. But I think that is actually probably part of the reason why I am who I am. I come from a stable family household with two parents who loved each other deeply. My mom was a teacher, which I think that probably has something to do with the fact that I really love being a coach. And she's also somebody who felt very comfortable talking to everyone and is curious about everyone's experiences. And I always thought that she would have been a fantastic reporter, because she's one of those people where if she's in the elevator with you, she's going to know your life story by the time you get from like floor 1 to floor 4. And I think that that's a beautiful characteristic about her. And it's something that I took with me into my career as a journalist, because I just love talking to people and finding out, how they got to be where they were. My dad was in human resources. I think he also brought so many beautiful qualities to my experience, as a kid. And, one of the things that really impacted me, and it's so funny, it was probably so small in his world, but it had a great impact on me when I was maybe, I'd probably be 9 or 10 years old. And he worked in this big office downtown. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I think we were going down there for maybe lunch, which was a big deal as a kid going to visit your dad in his office. And we were leaving his office and we were walking through a big lobby with, all sorts of marble and gleaming brass banisters. And there was a guy who was cleaning the banisters at the time. And he stopped and introduced us and, talked to him about his family. And he knew this guy's whole family situation and took a deep interest in his well-being and how he was doing. And it struck me, my dad was pretty high up in the corporate hierarchy, and we met probably some of the top people in the business, but, he treated everyone, no matter their station in life, exactly the same, and took a genuine interest in everyone. And I hope that I have carried that on. And, I think that did come into play in terms of how I conduct my life personally and professionally.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were set up for a profession where you were interacting with people, with a mother who loved to interact with people and a father in human resources who really saw every human being as precious.
Yeah. I think it's such a beautiful thing. I hope I pass that along to my kids too. And because it was a great gift.
You probably can't help passing it on.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
What about later on in your life? 'Cause I think that's a great story about your father introducing the person cleaning the banisters and, to you at the same level as he would have introduced the CEO of the company. What about later on in your life? Something that feels formative to you?
Well, I think going into a newsroom is a great way to be introduced into the real world, I guess. I actually got my first on-camera TV job when I was a senior in college. I was terrible. I'm really not sure why they hired me, except I was infinitely inexpensive. And I was the weekend weather person and the weekend reporter at this CBS affiliate in Youngstown, Ohio. And I was very fortunate to be in that position for sure, and was hired full-time when I graduated from college. But working in a newsroom, I think exposes you to a wide variety of perspectives and backgrounds. And I found all of that to be infinitely fascinating. So I think my work experiences were probably much more diverse than, a lot of different workplaces. And I hope that that made me more aware of differences and appreciative of them. And, it's interesting to think back to those days and, where we are today. And perhaps I learned some lessons earlier on in my career, but it's kind of an unusual situation where you see so many people from different aspects and different walks of life, kind of congregate in a newsroom is a very cacophonous, fast-moving place with lots of people being very vocal about their opinions and their thoughts. But I think it makes you richer because you're exposed to more ideas than if you're in kind of a homogenous environment.
Yes, for sure. What a gift to have that opportunity so young in your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It was a gift that my news director saw some potential in me when I had a long way to go. So I've been very, very fortunate in many different aspects of my life professionally. I can't say that it came easily because I did work hard, but I had some breaks that a lot of folks don't get. So I'm very, very fortunate.
Well, part of it's being in the right place at the right time. And the other part is that you actually have talent and, the people see it if they're looking for talent and they're used to looking for it. And so you may say, well, I was terrible back then, but you're comparing what you know now so many years later and your skills to that time. And that at that time you were probably brilliant for that age. So I'm sure if I would have met you at that age, I would have thought the same thing. Yeah, let's promote this girl. She's good.
Or you would have said, man, she's really cheap. Let's hire her.
No, I don't think that way.
Literally, my negotiating tactics with my first general manager were, I would do this job for free. I literally told him that.
Well, that always warms people's heart when you say that, just because it shows passion. So I'm sticking with my story.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Marie.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about culture. So culture is any two people and more. They develop norms of how they should interact with each other. And eventually it branches out. So you've got families, you've got ethnicities, you've got languages, you've got towns, you've got regions. There's nationalities, there's all sorts of stuff. What were you born into that you just were born into that and it has influenced you? And what would you say has influenced you strongly, other than your family that you already mentioned?
I wish I was more interesting, Marie, in that regard. I mean, I think that I was surrounded by people who were just hard workers. And it's not like we were raised with a lot of money. It's not like, and we had kind of a very middle class, suburban sort of experience.
So that's fine. Having a middle class suburban experience is a cultural experience. Okay. It's not any lower or less important than any other experience. It's an experience of growing up in suburbia is part of understanding the world.
But what I will say, Marie, and I don't think about this too often, but I think it really is something that shaped me, is I was definitely a daddy's girl and just I adored him. He passed 10 years ago now, which is crazy, but he did not have what I had, which was a very stable home life. His father was an alcoholic. His mother died at the age of 40 of breast cancer. And what I found most amazing about my dad was how joyful he was, regardless of his very tumultuous childhood. And he was also somebody who was going to find a way. So for example, he went to Lehigh University, which is an excellent university here in the States, and it was not an inexpensive place, but he figured out a way to be on academic scholarship and make his way through school. And I always admired how he never played the victim. He was very much, this is an experience that happened to me, but it's not going to hold me back. But you have to have the gumption, you have to have the drive to be able to move forward and to also just be a positive force in the world. So I think about the kind of the culture of hard work, the appreciation for education, and it was never a question that was hugely important in our lives. And
what you first said too, a culture of finding joy in things and in experiences and in being alive. And So, and, in the people that you're with, just a culture of joy is very significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about, I like to go through everything. So there's some people feel they're more affected by being female in the world. Others, it's their age group and how that age group was in history. I know that's a really big one for my husband. The whole time in history that he was born is very big influence. There's religion. People tend to be born into either religion or an umbrella of religion that's around them, whether they are practicing or not. Anything that stands out?
Well, I think about being a woman in my position. I can honestly say I don't feel like it's ever been something that has held me back, but maybe that's because I'm blissfully ignorant. But, what I found too is that there were some advantages of being a female reporter. And I'm thinking about a specific situation where it was a story where it was a horrible fire and there were several children who were killed. And my colleague and I were told to kind of get stories that were kind of sidebars to the main facts of what occurred. And my story that I was going to do was kind of the human angle and the impacts that these deaths were having on the firefighters, because there actually had been a series of fatal fires. And he said, hey, I'm going to talk to them about something else, but I'll get some interviews on this as well. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So after we had both done our thing and interviewed various people, I went back to look at the tape, and it was tape at the time. And it was so interesting for me to watch the interviews that he got versus the interviews that I got. The interviews that I got were so much more emotionally rich relative to the ones that he got. And I think that there's some sort of barrier whenever it's a guy talking to a guy and they don't want to really kind of speak about the emotions behind, what was going on, but they seem to open up more to me. And I have to think it has something to do with gender. But it was a good lesson for me just to think, this actually can possibly be something that makes it a better story, not in like a bad way, but just a more emotional story, one that is more authentic and truthful.
Well, I've experienced the same thing because I mostly work with men in industry who tend not to be very emotional. It's male-dominated workforces doing supervisory leadership training. And inevitably, they start to open up, warm up, talk about things in their lives, and they connect with each other on levels they haven't before because they're working with a woman. And my sister used to find instructors for a college that had to work with industry as well. And they were always looking for industry partners. And she said that it was really the dynamic that she was most looking for all the time was to get a female instructor for men and a male instructor for women, because the women were more forthright with a male instructor, and the men were more open with the female instructor.
Yeah, it would play to the same observation that I had with the interviews. And it does make sense, right? So when I think about what's it been like to be a woman in these various professions, to me, I feel like there's almost some advantage because I train and work with many, many men. And I think there might be a bit of maybe a disarming aspect that allows them to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable. Because if you think about it, what I teach, it requires people to do two things they typically hate, which is speak in public and engage with a camera. So like I am asking them to do something that is an act of courage in the first place. So, I feel like to get them to a place where they feel comfortable doing that requires a recognition of that and also just an appreciation for that vulnerability that they have to be open to. And I try to create what I call the circle of trust when I'm coaching or training people, just to make them feel like this is the opportunity to grow. But growth can be scary, right?
Mm-hmm. So from groups you chose to belong to, there might, for example, hobbies and interests, there can be, you might have learned another language or married someone from a different culture. You might have gone traveling and stayed for a while, like in that place, and learned something. So what you're laughing?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about you married somebody from a different culture. So I married into this giant Irish Catholic family. And I have one sister, I think, and I have five cousins, five first cousins, and that's it. And when I was planning my wedding with my husband of 28 years, I said, hey, let's have a small wedding. And he said, Karin, my immediate family is 22 people. And I said, oh my goodness. So he's one of 10. He's towards the bottom in terms of birth order. So, but it is a different culture in some ways, just because of the communication patterns, especially. And maybe I'm more heightened to the differences because of what I do. But, you know, I know everything that's going on in my sister's world. I know everything that's going on in my mother's world. And we talk multiple times a day. With his family, there are major gaps of information. Like we had one of our nieces who was born, and we didn't find out about it for a couple of days afterwards. And I think like that is just hilarious to me. And, you know, coming from such a small family, that was quite the adjustment.
Yeah, that is definitely an adjustment. So what would you say has changed for you?
I think I've developed an appreciation for it. There's such joy in having a big family. One of the things that we have tried to do is to make sure that our children, we have 2 boys, are very connected to both sides of the family, because then they can appreciate the differences as well. They love whenever we go to our big holiday get together and there's like 35 people in one house. And it's, you know, not during COVID, obviously, but that has been a part of the way they've grown up. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. And then they can be equally appreciative of the quiet family get together on my side, when you have more of an opportunity to have those, you know, deeper discussions. And so I think that's been such an enriching experience for me, and hopefully will shape the way my kids will develop as well.
It makes me think of a conversation I had not so long ago with a young friend of mine. She's 18 and she has one sister, and she and that one sister were talking about, it's nice that they know each other, but they belong to a very big family. Both their mothers live not far from each other in houses that are nearby, and they have 6 aunts and uncles, and those aunts had many children, and so they grew up with this experience of the big family, and yet there's just 2. They're the only ones with only 2, right? And they're thinking, well, you know, when we're bigger, there won't be that huge network of family to take care of us like there is for our extended family with the aunts and uncles, and it was, they were really reflecting on this, you know, an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and it was just really interesting. But I think the reason they were thinking about it so much is because 2 of their aunts have passed away recently from cancer. So they're thinking, well, everybody's here, but what if everybody is only the 2 of us, you know?
That's really interesting. And actually, what has happened recently in my husband's family is his parents are needing to be moved into an assisted living facility. And so it's been a matter of kind of figuring out what that looks like on Zoom. And so you have a very full Zoom gallery view of all of his different siblings, and seeing them kind of congregate around this mutual area of concern and, you know, trying to come up with a plan has been really kind of a beautiful thing to see, because I'm sure that there are some families where, you know, that is just the cause of massive friction. But for them, even though it's a big family, everybody is really kind of tackling it with good intentions and good attitudes. And it's also actually kind of been bonding for them. But, you know, the idea of, you know, not having that massive support group that you created, you know, by having many children, that's kind of interesting to think about. And we kind of kid, my husband and I, about, okay, who's going to take care of us whenever we're old? And we definitely have one who we think is going to be the leader. And the other one, we think he'll definitely care, but he may not be the one to drop everything and come help us. And we adore him. We adore both of our children, but it's just different personalities. You think you make one kind of kid, but you don't.
No, exactly. Each person is unique.
Yep.
Even though there are family characteristics, which kind of leads me to my next question, is about temperament and personality. So your temperament being what you're born with, personality you add on and change as you experience life. So what would you say you were born with? What did you add on later?
Boundless optimism. And also a lack of fear of being told no. So, you know, I think about this from a very young age. I've always been thinking maybe 10 steps ahead, and always thought, okay, what's going to be my next step and how can I position myself to do that? So whenever I was in 7th grade, we had to write an autobiography and say what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I had written one of two things. I wanted to either be on Broadway, be a Broadway performer, or I wanted to be a news anchor. and I thought, I found it like many years later. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I said that in 7th grade. But whenever I went to college, and it's funny because I initially was an accounting major, which was an absolutely awful fit, but my sister was an accounting major. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try that. And I did change to, it's kind of like an English communications degree. My school didn't have a communications department, so they kind of let me create my own curriculum. But what I decided to do once I realized that I probably wanted to go into journalism was to reach out to all of the network morning shows and ask if I could shadow somebody there for the day. And so my mom was like, nobody's going to respond. I think it was, maybe it was the time of Katie Couric and those folks. And lo and behold, I did get a phone call on my answering machine at the time in college with the CBS morning show. We're saying, yeah, we'd love to have you come in. And my mother was so amazed and also proud that I didn't, listen to her and that I actually just went for it. But I have no problem just putting something out there. And if they say no, then I try something different. And I think that has played a big role in how I have conducted my life. So I've always been kind of 10 steps ahead. But I tell you, the thing that changed, Marie, was whenever I had my children, because getting pregnant did not come easily. It took us several years. And then whenever we did get pregnant, I think I had such a huge appreciation for it and for the fact that I had the opportunity to have two beautiful sons. And then I went from kind of being 10 steps ahead to be thinking, oh, I want to stay in this moment here. I want to, be able to really kind of wrap my hands around this and just, appreciate what a blessing this is.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. And more people are having issues with fertility. It seems to be a worldwide problem, partly related probably to the toxins and things around us.
Yeah.
But it makes you appreciate how important it is to be able to propagate the species.
Well, it totally shifted my priorities. And, I mentioned that I left the business. I left because I had two babies, actually a year apart. Very difficult to get pregnant with the first. Never imagined I'd be able to get pregnant again. And it was very shocking when I took a pregnancy test, literally right before I went on to anchor a newscast. And I looked at the stick and thought, alrighty then. And then I went out and anchored a newscast and then immediately, got off the air and then went to the pharmacy and got another one, and just to be sure. But, what happened was, I had these two beautiful boys and I tried to handle what is a very demanding career with being the mother I wanted to be. And I just could not figure out how to make it work. And that's really why I left. And I don't regret that decision one bit, but I've consequently always been kind of doing this calculus in terms of what is the balance I want to strike between my professional life and my personal life. And it's one that you consistently have to recalibrate. I mean, last year was a huge year for my business, understandably, just because of what I do. But things got out of whack. I was working way too much and I was losing the kind of balance that I like to have in my life, even though it was such a blessing to be able to have the business that I did. But, there are diminishing returns. And I think that having my children, that's what forced me to really kind of say, all right, hold on. You don't need to constantly be figuring out, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Sometimes it's really nice to just sit there and go, wow, what a great place I'm in right now. And just have that moment of gratitude. It's
a tightrope, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. It's not that you're just there in a Zen moment and that's the way you stay. You just have to keep balancing on the tightrope.
Yeah. And I've always tried to make sure that my priorities play out with what happens in my life. So, and there was one moment where actually it was, my kids it was a special moment at church for them. And I had to fly to a client engagement, like very close to the time of when it was actually occurring. They were going through confirmation. And I remember, they were confirmed in the service, and afterwards, typically there's conversation and kind of celebration afterwards. And I had to leave like right away. And I was so upset by it. And I thought, dang it, work won today. And I didn't want it to win, but there was no way around it. But I can honestly say there are only a handful of those times where I felt like I am missing something that I really, really don't want to miss. I've really been able to kind of, work my schedule so that I'm there for the really critical moments for me and for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you missed a few along the way, that's good for their character development too.
That makes me feel better. Thanks, Marie.
Children don't develop by having everything easy and handed to them.
Yeah,
they develop through negotiating the difficulties in life.
But I think that's so interesting that you talk about that, Marie, because that's one of the things I don't feel I've done a great job with my kids. I don't know if I've taught them grit. I think that some of that comes through what they're born with, and some of it is also just, through life experience. But the pandemic, I feel like that is actually teaching them grit. And both of my boys are in college, and they've had to adjust to all of the craziness of, online school and what that has done with their course load and with their social lives and their friendships. And, I feel like they are learning grit. So I think there's value in that.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's your job to teach them grit. Life happens.
Yeah.
And if you help them realize that the pains and the difficulties are necessary to growth, and not that they've been slighted because they had to go through what the rest of humanity has to go through. Your response to that helps them to take it to the next level of transformation. Yeah. I'm sure you did that.
I hope. Yeah, I really found it fascinating to see how they've responded. I think that they both have done a beautiful job just navigating all of these new situations that have been thrown at them, and they've kind of taken it in stride. And I'm really proud of them for that.
I'm going to give you a challenge here.
Okay.
I think that the biggest negotiation is social class. And people tend to stay within their own social class and not ever question it, although they would move outside of their race, their culture, and their experience in many other ways, but they stay stuck in social class without ever realizing it. If you really want your boys to learn grit, make sure that they're exposed to a variety of social classes, that they learn to interact with them.
Yeah, I think that is great advice, actually. And, it's funny because both of them have done quite a bit of volunteerism over the years. I mean, that was important to us. But I wonder if that actually does.
I've said that to a couple of people before, and they go, oh, yeah, well, we volunteer. I said, it's not really about volunteering, although volunteering is good to develop an attitude of service.
Yeah.
And altruism, I think it's about interacting with people who feel so different from you, because social class is the biggest cultural disruptor, which actually is my next question. Yeah. So good segue. Have you run into a situation where you just felt that the way I see the world is that I thought was normal is actually just my own experience, my own cultural experience, and it just hits you? Like you just go, wow. And I was thinking of social class experience myself right now, where I had a contract where I was working with First Nations, I guess they'd say American Indian in the States, but with the First Nations group to gather information about how people were aging. And so I went to one of the events where they held cooking classes, and then everybody would have a dinner together. And the experience of being with people where everybody that was there was in the worst poverty, and where I was the only person who wasn't, it was very uncomfortable. I've been in many experiences where I was with people of a variety of social classes and differences of wealth that were quite extreme, down and up, but never where I was the complete minority in terms of, these people were so poor, most of them were homeless. So it was such a shock. I didn't know how to speak or negotiate, how not to be paternalistic, and I was second guessing myself. How do I actually have a conversation? How do I bridge this canyon of experience that is so different from the way we see the world? And I just remember being tongue-tied. I typically am not tongue-tied. So yeah, I don't know. Have you ever had an experience like that?
Well, I think when you work in TV news, I think you're constantly exposed to situations and people and environments that are very different from your own. And I think that's very valuable.
But you're in control and you can lead.
Right, exactly. Like I don't think that I have, I can't think of something like that would be equivalent to mine. But what I think I am aware of is the fact that I have it. And so what I try to do, and it's, kind of in a, not as effective way, I try to at least educate myself so that I can kind of fill in some of those gaps in my experience. So like, for example, right now I'm reading, and I'm going to actually read the title because I want to make sure that I get it right, but it's called The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person. And it's by Frederick Joseph. And like, I think I need to listen to this because I am aware that my experiences have many, many holes. And, I feel like it is really critical for everyone to be able to see beyond their own cultural prism. And I may not be, gosh, we can't actually have many experiences during COVID that are face to face right now anyway, but I feel like there is a certain responsibility to look outside our own experiences and try to understand what it's like for folks who live a very different existence than you do.
Yeah, I think perhaps so everybody has holes in their experience. And as we interact, we help to fill those holes for each other.
But don't you think some people are fine just not having those holes filled in, and they would rather just have more confirmation bias based upon their own life experiences?
Sure, but don't you think that just shrinks being a human being?
Oh, it does. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying I think that's bad. And I
actually don't know if it's good or bad. I'm just saying that that's it. To me, it's similar to people who have a depth of experience in a single place. They're connecting in ways in that single place with a depth that people who have a breadth of experience don't have. People with a breadth of experience have this broad experience, but they don't have that depth of experience in one spot. And so
it's not good or bad. You're right. I think that that's actually really interesting to think about. Yeah. So because they're going to, it's that depth rather than breadth.
Like my stepmother can't really think beyond the price of meat and the next recipe that I'm going to make. And that's okay, because that's her experience and that's how she sees the world. And I have to respect and love that experience in her. I don't know how to explain this. I think I'm going off on a tangent. Let me get back to my last two questions.
This is great, Marie. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, good. So we're getting close to the end of the interview. I wanted to ask you about when people hire you, what do you say about what would be the most effective way to work with you? What do you need to be able to work effectively with other people?
For my own personal, for our training that we do, or what?
Yeah, I mean, you're negotiating a new contract with a client or something like that. But, you have a way of working that works best for you. So, what do you tell people? How do you explain that?
Well, it depends on the number of people who need to be trained and the depth of experience and the level of competency they wish to acquire.
I'm not talking about logistics. I'm talking about you.
Oh, okay.
What do you need to be able to make this work for you and for them? What does it take to work with Karin effectively?
A sense of humor? No, I'm teasing.
No, that's good. A sense of humor. All right, good. What else?
Well, I think honestly, at this point, Marie, I really want to work with people I enjoy, and I hope that they will enjoy me as well. And having an open mind to rethinking the way they do things, being willing to be vulnerable. And, as mentioned, it's difficult to have the courage to speak in public and then to add a camera into the equation as well. So it's an openness to try new things, a positive attitude, being nice, being encouraging of those who are with you, who are going along on the learning journey with you. I'd like to create kind of an environment where people are bonded by the experience, not because they've been through a traumatic one, but rather because they feel like they've really grown. That's where I find the true joy is whenever people say, oh, I still have that workbook that you gave me 9 years ago on my desk. And I refer to that. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And, I call myself the Chief Confidence Creator because that is truly what I feel my role is. I feel like everybody has stories to share and something that should be brought into the world to make it richer for all of us. But I think so many people are held back by a fear of communicating it. So if I can help people to be able to get all that brilliance in their heads out to us, I think that that's just a great job to have.
Yes, I love it. It's you build harmony, you create joy, you develop confidence, and they move reinforced and safe into the world. So here's your spot to promote. What would you like people to pay attention to right now in your life? What product or service or book are you launching? What would you like us to know about you that we can focus on at the end of this interview?
Marie, thank you for giving the opportunity to even make a plug. Probably the thing that is most valuable to the vast majority of us these days is the book that's coming out shortly called Suddenly Virtual: Making Remote Meetings Work. And it's written with my co-author, Dr. Joseph Allen. There are so many folks who are now trying to be more strategic in how they are conducting these virtual meetings with video at their core. And this is a data-based guide. This is not just anecdotal. This is based upon science. And it's meant to be used as a workbook and as a reference, and something that should be pretty fun to read too. So that is coming out shortly. The other thing I would suggest is if people are really struggling with doing these virtual presentations and virtual meetings, I have an online course that is virtual video engagement training that I've been doing nonstop for the past 10 months. And hopefully this online course will allow me to kind of meet the demand of folks who are perhaps outside of an organization who still want to be trained effectively. And that's going to be available March 1st on my website, speakerdynamics.com.
Great. Well, we'll put all that information and those links into the show notes. And I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of and reading that book when it gets out, Suddenly Virtual: Making Remote Meetings Work.
It will be coming your way. Thank you, Marie.
Anything else you'd like to say to end off the interview?
Just, I appreciate the opportunity to have such an interesting, engaging, and thought-provoking conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being a guest on the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast.
As a successful broadcast journalist, Karin interviewed celebrities, eventually applying her skills in the corporate world. As a successful broadcast journalist, Karin Reed interviewed celebrities, eventually applying her skills in the corporate world, helping professionals become better on-camera communicators. Karin Reed was raised with love, hard work, and positivity, which she infuses into her work as a communications coach today. She is in high demand now that the pandemic has opened up new opportunities for her to showcase the skills she's been teaching for 10 years to new audiences. I really enjoyed my interview with Karin Reed, and I'm sure we could all learn a lot about video presentation by applying her strategies and skills. Thank you for listening, and may Culture and Leadership Connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep Culture and Leadership Connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.